Taoiseach and Ministers, we will be opposing this motion. Where Sinn Féin stands on the issue of migration, in my view, is quite similar to where the vast bulk of Irish people stand. What we believe in is common sense and common decency. Most people recognise that where people are genuinely fleeing war and oppression, that they deserve protection and support. Most Irish people recognise that many migrants here make a huge contribution to Irish society. Most people also, I believe, agree that this must be on the basis of rules, and that where there are rules, that those rules must be applied. They want to see resources prioritised to those who need them most. It is clear that resources are currently scarce and under severe pressure. People do not want to see a migration system that's unmanaged. They do not want to see a system that's slow, inefficient and fails to follow through. They want to see a system that is fair, efficient and enforced. The rules must be followed up on, and where someone is deemed not to be genuine need of international protection, they need to be returned. Irish people want to see a system that applies common sense and common decency. There is no sense in the Government's approach to the Migration Pact. The Minister confirmed to me in the Justice Committee that no consideration, absolutely no consideration, was given to not opting in to all of this pact. That is what you said. I asked you a very straight question. You said the answer to that first question is no. That is what you said, and we can look back at the record afterwards, but you said very clearly that no consideration was given, and I checked it again this morning. It was a reckless and not thought-through approach. You can clarify in your summing up remarks, but what is on the record is crystal clear, Minister. This is a reckless and not thought-through approach, and I think the public would be absolutely astonished at this. We are in a unique position. We share a common travel area with Britain, as we have for the guts of a century. We have considerations that no other countries have because of that common travel area. It's my view that it is a mistake not to ensure that we have flexibility. If we are tied into the EU system entirely, we reduce our ability to respond and legislate in a bilateral way with Britain. We are not blind to the necessity of international cooperation where that is necessary and where it makes sense. We would and do support measures that are in the interest of Ireland where we believe that international protection makes sense, or cooperation makes sense. We have to be able to return those who seek to make an asylum application here to the first country where an international protection applicant has made a claim. That is why we support opting into the Asylum Migration Management Regulation. We have to be able to access the fingerprint database in Eurodac and all the data associated with that to ensure we have information on who enters the state and to assist with vetting, conducting checks, tackling child trafficking and returning asylum seekers where appropriate. That is why we support the Eurodac regulation, which involves that legislative powers. However, we will oppose opting into the measures that are not helpful, which gives powers to the EU and which will tie the hands of future Irish government. We oppose opting into the Procedures Regulation, the Crisis and Force Majeure Regulation, the Qualifications Directive, the Reception Conditions Directive and the EU Resettlement Framework. We do so because we are opposed to the Government's plan to opt Ireland in fully to the Migration Pact. This is an issue of Irish sovereignty and flexibility into the future. Signing up to the Migration Pact will tie the hands of future Irish governments. There are decisions that are better made in Ireland, and the Minister herself has outlined the various things that she believes that she can do without the Migration Pact. It is our view that much more can still be done in relation to that. I think if you listen back, that's obviously not the case, Donnchadh. Only by retaining the powers to make our own decisions on migration will we maintain a system that's properly managed and fair, that applies common sense and common decency. It does not make sense to give up that flexibility. We also oppose it because there are huge human rights concerns. Several human rights organisations in the Justice Committee outlined a number of concerns regarding the potential in some of the provisions and the welfare of vulnerable asylum seekers. We know the stories of detention centres in countries such as Greece. In recent days even, the BBC carrying horrific reports of migrants deliberately thrown into the sea and put out to sea. Stories that would make your blood run cold. The EU is complicit in this. The EU Migration Pact does not address these serious shortcomings in EU migration policy. Migration does not arise from nowhere. It is caused by war, conflict, poverty, inequality and climate change, and Ireland should be a role for peace and conflict resolution. I should comment briefly on the plague that is racist commentary that unfortunately has become too commonplace in society and particularly online. It's truly a disgrace that people chose to attack someone who brought such pride to Ireland as Donnchadh Ó Laoghaire, with some even seeking to question her Irishness. It is a disgrace that we have seen people attacked and killed for not speaking English, as was Joseph Strock in West Dublin. We must take every opportunity to stand against such hatred. There are people who are seeking to stoke division. This is quite different, in my opinion, from those who have genuine concerns regarding migration. There are undoubtedly ways of raising those issues. I recognise that people have concerns, and it is important that Irish politics does not repeat the mistakes that have been made elsewhere of discarding entirely people who have such reservations. People are entitled to have their views and express them. Many people have expressed such concerns to me in respectful ways that I can comprehend, but that can never justify violence and racism. Briefly, to acknowledge some recent developments, I note that the Government has now moved on what Sinn Féin has said in relation to chartering flights. I also welcome what the Minister has said in relation to 400 additional staff, which is another thing that Sinn Féin would have been calling for, in addition to the point in relation to increased fines on the airlines, another point that we would have advocated, and I'm glad that you're listening to some of those points, and I hope that you might listen to further points. In relation to chartering flights, while this has utility, and we don't disagree with it, it would be far more effective to ensure that the rules are in fact applied and in fact enforced. Because the attitude of this government seems to be that it just isn't worth the trouble of following up and ensuring that people have left. Because just as I said that people recognise the need to provide protection for people who need it, I think people also recognise that the rules must mean something. In 2022, there were 5,711 applications for asylum refused, withdrawn or inadmissible, with only 948 or 10% issued with orders, and only 52 of those enforced by GNIB. 317 of that 948 were then confirmed to have left by the Department of Justice, a small portion of it. In 2024, of 586 orders, there were 220 confirmed returns by the Department of Justice. Again, a minority of those. I'll finish on this. Minister, the Government's policy is not to follow up on applications and expect unsuccessful asylum seekers to depart themselves without oversight and verification. If someone is willing to leave themselves voluntarily, that is better for everyone. But if that isn't the case, the rules do have to be enforced, and it's become clear that the authorities do not know where many international protection applicants are, and our system must be fair, efficient and enforced, and in my evaluation, it fails on all three counts.
Deputy Paddy.